Frieren is one of the only stories I've seen where regret isn't treated as a failure, but more a form of understanding. Because almost every major emotional moment in the series seems to start the same way. It's that Frieren remembers something, whether it be a conversation, a joke, a small gesture from Himmel. And only then does she realise what it meant. But what's most interesting is that this happens. Again, and again, and again. Frieren discovers that she understands her life less while she was living it than she does years later looking back on it. And that's what I think Frieren is really about. Not immortality, nor grief, and not even necessarily time itself. It's about the strange fact that we often don't know what moments mean until they're already over. Most of us assume life works in a pretty straightforward way. First we experience, then we understand, and finally we remember. But Frieren flips this idea on its head. In this story, understanding becomes the latter stage. A memory can sit dormant for years and before we really understand its significance. And a moment that once felt ordinary becomes important only in hindsight. And honestly, that's true for a lot of us. Think about your own life, for example. There are probably conversations that seemed completely normal at the time, but became meaningful only years later. Paul Ricoeur argued that we don't fully understand our lives while living them. Instead, we make sense of them retrospectively, by looking back and turning scattered experiences into a story that we can better comprehend. We live first and interpret later, and that's basically Frieren's entire story. She's not just revisiting her past, she's reinterpreting it. She's understanding it better as she progresses in the future. And the best example of this is Himmel. When Frieren first travels with Himmel, she clearly likes him. She enjoys his company, and somewhat respects him, but she doesn't really understand him. Or maybe more accurately, she doesn't understand what he means to her. So many of the moments we see in flashbacks, as the viewer, feel almost painfully obvious when we watch them. Himmel constantly goes out of his way to spend time and foster memories alongside Frieren. He notices small things and he makes gestures clearly meaningful. And the audience sees this. Himmel obviously sees this. And yet our dopey protagonist Frieren doesn't. At least not yet. And the tragedy isn't simply that Himmel dies, but everyone dies. Only after this does Frieren begin to understand what she's lost after they are gone. Not because necessarily the past has changed, but because her perspective has changed. And I think that's why the show resonates so deeply with people. Most of us have experienced some version of this. That uncomfortable feeling when you suddenly realise how important something was after it has already become a memory. The realisation that the most meaningful chapter of your life didn't necessarily feel meaningful whilst you were living it. You only recognised it once you could look back on it. And what's fascinating is that Frieren's immortality doesn't necessarily create this problem, but it magnifies it. She's an exaggerated version of something that's already true within us. Whilst we're all moving forward through life without fully understanding what matters, we're all, in some sense, emotionally late. And maybe that's the real message of Frieren. Not that life is short. We've heard that before, a million times. But that meaning isn't always available in the present moment. Sometimes understanding arrives years later. The things that shape us most may look completely ordinary while they're happening. And sometimes regret isn't necessarily a sign that we failed to appreciate something. Sometimes it's evidence that we finally understood it. That's why Frieren feels so emotional despite being such a quiet show. It's not really about losing the past. It's about finally learning how to read it, and realising that some of the most important moments in our lives only reveal themselves after they've become memories.